to midnight. Good evening. The husband of the dominant figure in Scottish politics of the last decade has been charged tonight following a long-running investigation into the alleged embezzlement of funds. Peter Murrell has been Nicola Sturgeon's partner for more than 2 decades. During that time, he's also served as the SNP's chief executive. He was first arrested a year ago. The party said tonight that the news would come as a shock. From Glasgow, our Scotland correspondent Conor Gillis reports.
1 year ago, this was the scene as police searched the home of the former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon and her husband Peter Murrell. They were Scotland's political power couple for so long. She as SNP leader, he as the chief executive for 2 decades. Police Scotland searched the party's HQ last year in a probe examining its funding and finances dating back to 2021. Nicola Sturgeon herself was also arrested and later released without charge. In what is the most dramatic moment so far, detectives here in Scotland have now confirmed Peter Murrell has been charged in connection with embezzlement of funds. The 59-year-old spent more than 10 hours in police custody, facing questions.
I'm not sure if you heard what I just said. I'm not going to comment on an ongoing police inquiry. It would be wrong to do it.
I think now Police Scotland need to be given the space to do their job, to complete the investigation without any interference.
Arriving home after a difficult day for him, his wife and the SNP. The case is now with prosecutors. Any comment, Mr Murrell?
And Conor joins me now. Conor, putting the investigation itself to one side, the fact of its existence has been a long-running problem for the SNP politically, and this latest development comes in what is almost certainly an election year.
I think that's fair, Gillian. This has been going on for so long. 3 long years, police detectives north of the border examining the SNP's funding and finances. The party issuing a very brief statement this evening saying this has come as a shock. Sky News also understands that Peter Murrell has resigned his membership of the SNP. I think there is a sense, though, that the longer this lingers, the more politically troubling it is for the SNP. The current First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf, saying in the last number of weeks that he would welcome an end to this police probe. Well, I think that is the understatement of the year as opposition politicians take a sober approach today. It's all eyes on a big general election year, and clearly this is an unwelcome moment for the SNP.
Indeed. Conor, thank you.
Good evening from Jerusalem. Iran's nuclear program exists for peaceful purposes. The country has always insisted. But today, its military warned that that stance may change if Israel targets its nuclear infrastructure. Iran's defence industry was targeted today by new sanctions introduced by countries, including the UK, on firms producing drones and missiles. Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, reports.
Iran has never shied away from showing off its ballistic missiles, but it's always been more coy about its nuclear ambitions. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei insisting using nuclear weapons is religiously forbidden. And Iran's always insisted its nuclear program is for civilian purposes, even if Israel and the West don't believe a word of it. But now a senior Iranian commander says that entire nuclear doctrine is under review.
If there are any threats or actions by the fake Zionist regime against the country's nuclear facilities aiming at pressuring the Islamic Republic, reconsidering our nuclear doctrine and policy and violating the considerations announced before will be likely and imaginable.
And 5 days after firing cruise and ballistic missiles at Israel, the same official warned Iran knows where Israeli nuclear sites are and could target them if it wants to.
The enemy's nuclear sites have been identified and we have necessary information about all targets. We have our finger on the trigger to fire powerful missiles to destroy specified targets.
Chilling warnings, even if Israel and allies were able to shoot down most of the missiles sent its way by Iran over the weekend. Israel isn't toning down its rhetoric either. Its defence minister saying military activity is being stepped up.
Our missions are not going to decrease, they are only going to increase. The reality that we are being attacked from 7 different fronts, aerially 6 fronts, is a complex reality, and it will challenge us and accompany us.
Allies are urging Israel to let them sanction Iran and not strike back itself.
Iran's behaviour is unacceptable, and it's right that countries come together here at the G7 and make those points, not just because of what Iran has been doing, but also as a message to Israel that we want to play our part in having a coordinated strategy that deals with Iran's aggression.
But Israel says being attacked with hundreds of massive missiles like this demands a response. It will retaliate. It's just a question of when. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Jerusalem.
Well, since Saturday, there may have been an increasing war of words between Israel and Iran. But for now, no further attacks. That isn't the case on Israel's northern border, where rocket attacks from Hezbollah, the militia supported by Iran, continues. Well, the city of Kiryat Shmona is close to the border, and our international correspondent, Alex Rossi, reports from there.
The roads through northern Israel along the border with Lebanon are empty of cars. Since October the 7th, the area has been under bombardment from Hezbollah militants.
It was shot from there and entered through the wall here.
Ariel Frisch, the deputy head of security in Kiryat Shmona, a frontline city, shows me the damage in a residential area.
We got attacked by a great wave of missiles. One of the missiles hit this house. Nobody was here because we evacuated the city 1 week before. And if we were not evacuated, there will be no survivors.
The IDF and Hezbollah have been exchanging fire on a daily basis in the north for more than 6 months. And it feels like a full-scale war may not be far away.
It is really eerie walking around these places. They're deserted. Most people have left. The government has in place evacuation orders. Now, Lebanon's over there. That's where we're told most of the missiles are being fired from. But it's very quiet here. We can hear birdsong, but the noise from drones and warplanes above is also constant.
Up on the hill, it's already a village in Lebanon, which is called El Khiyam.
A short distance from the border, and former IDF commander Gideon Harari, who lives in one of the communities in the line of fire, says a major confrontation is looking more likely.
The shooting is daily. Rockets, drones, every day. Now is the most dangerous point in the Middle East for the last 40 years. If Israel will take some measures, military measures against Iran, it might drive us into a Middle East war, a big war.
The internally displaced have moved to hotels and guest houses in safer parts of Israel. In Tiberias, the evacuees can only wonder when it will be safe to return.
The mood of the people in Israel is very frustrating. And it's very dangerous to live here because now it's the threat from Hezbollah in the north.
Israel now faces crises on multiple fronts, but it is clear the current situation in the north is increasingly untenable. It will not take much for a broader war to break out. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Northern Israel.
Well, you're looking at live images of the UN Security Council in New York, and they're expected to vote on a Palestinian bid for full UN membership tonight, a move we understand the United States is expected to block. You're listening, or you can see there, the Algerian ambassador to the UN, and it's Algeria that has proposed this vote. Well, let's bring in our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, who joins me here live in Jerusalem. And Dom, there's so many moving parts, right? The situation there in New York with the Security Council, what Alex was talking about with the ongoing war with Hezbollah, and of course this nuclear threat that Iran has made today.
Yeah, there's a lot going on diplomatically, geopolitically. What's going on in New York is, as you say, an attempt for Palestine to be recognised as a state. It's been discussed by the UN Security Council. There are 15 members of that council. As many as 13 countries could vote in favour, but we expect a veto, obviously, from at least America. And as a permanent member of the Security Council, that means they would block the outcome, whatever the other countries vote, because America believes that Palestine could be created, but only as the result and the outcome of negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. So if, whatever the vote tonight, I mean, if it goes in favour of a Palestinian state, but is blocked by America, it will be a symbolic move. It will, I think, further illustrate the isolation and ostracisation of Israel, but no more than that. But I think a lot more concern for Israel is what the Iranians have been saying tonight. They've been saying a couple of things. One is that they know where Israel's nuclear sites are, they'll target them. That's of less concern because to the Israelis, they clearly will have well protected their nuclear sites, whatever they are. They also have shown on Saturday night that they are protected not only by their own air defences and the Israeli Air Force, but also by this coalition of countries, not just Western countries, but Arab nations too, that would block any attempts to attack whatever targets there are in Israel, should Iran try to attack Israel again. But I think of more concern is what this senior IRGC commander said about the nuclear doctrine. Now, that doctrine is that the Iranians believe they have a right to have a nuclear program, but they say it's for civilian purposes, and the Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, has always said that using a nuclear bomb is haram, it's religiously forbidden, and stockpiling and building one is wrong as well. Now, to raise doubts about that is of concern. Now, of course, part of these nuclear ambitions the Iranians have been pursuing for so long is as a form of blackmail, as a form of leverage on the Israelis and the outside world. So I think that's part of that, but I think it shows what's at stake as Israel ponders its next move in retaliation to what Iran did on the weekend.
Well, Dom, thank you for all of your analysis. And of course, we will be watching the developments at the UN Security Council. But for now, back to you in London, Julian.
Yalda, thank you. Nicola Sturgeon has already featured on our programme tonight, and another part of her legacy was dismantled today as the Scottish Government executed a climate climb-down. Until now, it had a world-leading goal to cut carbon emissions by 75% by 2030. That's now been scrapped after a report from the Climate Change Committee said the aim is out of reach. Scotland's final goal of reaching net zero by 2045 remains, and the country is still 5 years ahead of the UK as a whole, which is in law aiming to reach net zero by 2050. Our science correspondent Thomas Moore has this report.
I am declaring that there is a climate emergency.
It wasn't long ago that Scotland boasted about its climate commitments. Greta Thunberg even appeared alongside the First Minister, who promised the most ambitious plan for reducing carbon of all the UK nations. But that's now in tatters, with a target to cut emissions by 75% by the end of the decade scrapped.
Please allow me to begin by setting out my regret.
A more distant goal for net zero still remains.
We must now act to chart a course to 2045 at a pace and a scale that is feasible, fair and just.
Climate campaigners have called it the worst environment decision in the history of the Scottish Parliament, and it comes in the face of a rapidly changing climate north and south of the border. In Worcestershire, the county cricket ground has been flooded 8 times since the autumn. More of a boating lake than a wicket.
The real high point, which I stand about 6'4", so that's probably about 5 foot.
Even now, with the season underway, the pitches are unplayable.
The club's been here from around 1899, and in that time, the 30 highest floods recorded, 19 of them have been in the last 24 years. So the data in that sense just doesn't lie.
According to the Met Office, the 18 months to March were England's wettest in records going back to 1836. And across the UK, it has been a windy winter with 11 named storms. In Staffordshire, a caravan was wrecked this week by what's thought to have been a tornado. Floods, droughts and heat waves are becoming more frequent and more severe. A lot of the focus is on trying to reach net zero by 2050, but there's a broad scientific consensus that global carbon emissions need to be almost halved by the end of this decade to stand any chance of keeping global warming to 1.5 degrees. And that is the way to rein in wild weather. So scientists are alarmed that Scotland has joined the UK government in watering down climate commitments.
The price for that is paid by Scottish farmers, by people who, have their houses flooded, who die in heat waves in the summer.
The cost of doing nothing to mitigate climate change would be more than the cost of reaching net zero. But while the science is clear, the politics in Scotland and elsewhere are more complicated, and climate commitments being tested as never before. Thomas Moore, Sky News.
I just want to take you back to the United Nations Council in New York, and that is the vote that is taking place on Palestine's bid to be fully admitted into the UN, to have full membership. The Russian ambassador speaking at the moment, but we can tell you that the Americans, as expected, have vetoed that vote, so no surprise there. We'll, of course, keep you updated as to other members' decisions throughout the course of the evening. There are 18 MPs currently listed as independent in the House of Commons after either voluntarily or forcibly leaving their parties. The majority of them used to be Conservative. The latest to join them, Mark Menzies, was suspended over allegations of misuse of campaign funds, including to pay thousands in medical fees. The MP disputes the allegations. Our political correspondent Darren McCaffrey has more.
There was a time when Mark Menzies was a rising star in the Conservatives, but now he finds himself marred again in scandal, under investigation, suspended by the party and removed from his government job. According to The Times, the latest incident dates back to last December, when Menzies woke his elderly former campaign manager at 3:15 a.m, asking for £5,000 as he'd been locked in a flat by what he claimed were bad people. A few hours later, the amount demanded had risen to £6,500, with his current constituency manager Shirley Green using her savings to provide the money. Green was then reimbursed from funds donated by local Conservatives. And yet the following day, Menzies demanded yet another £35,000 for medical bills. It wasn't until January that the Conservative chief whip was told and an investigation launched. Only when the allegations were about to become public did Mark Menzies lose the whip and his envoy job. He told The Times, "I strongly dispute the allegations put to me. I fully complied with all the rules for declarations." It's not the first time he's found himself in trouble. In 2014, he resigned from the government over claims he'd paid for sex and drugs. 3 years later, he was questioned by police over bizarre accusations he deliberately got a dog drunk. In both cases, he said, the allegations were malicious and the police never took any action.
He has had the whip withdrawn. Some further information that the Chief Whip, I understand, became familiar with yesterday, and action's been swiftly taken on the basis of that further information.
But Labour are now demanding for the investigation to go further.
There are obviously a lot of unanswered questions in relation to these allegations, not least why it seems the Conservative Party took so long to act, and whether they've reported this to the police, who it seems to me should be involved in this.
One of the things that makes Fylde such a special place are the people who live here.
For the people of his usually safe coastal Conservative seat, it's fair to say voters are not happy.
If you were imprisoned by somebody overnight, you'd call the police, wouldn't you? Particularly in his position, I think. I think I would.
It should have gone months ago when it first came out. It's been covered up, hasn't it?
They tell us what to do, and they don't have the same moral inclinations as most other people around here. So he shouldn't be standing at all.
Depending on the investigation, it may in the end not be up to his constituents whether Mark Menzies survives or not. But in the meantime, this is yet another headache for the Prime Minister, and one he frankly can ill afford to have. Darren McCaffrey, Sky News.
Some more breaking news to bring you now. The 12 jurors in Donald Trump's hush money trial have all now been selected. Lawyers still need to select 6 alternate jurors for the trial, the first ever criminal trial of a former president. Scores of prospective jurors were dismissed after saying they doubted their ability to be fair and impartial. The families of 48 people killed in a nightclub fire in Dublin have waited more than 40 years for some form of justice. Today, the deaths were ruled unlawful killings by a jury after an inquest. The Stardust nightclub burned down in the early hours of Valentine's Day in 1981. Our senior island correspondent, David Blevins, reports from Dublin.
One step closer to justice for the families of those whose lives were taken in Ireland's worst ever fire tragedy. The jury verdict that every victim had been unlawfully killed brought them hope at last.
We'd just like to say to the 48 now that we're taking you out of the flames, the darkness and the smoke of the Stardust, and we're bringing you back to the sunshine and the light and the music, and you're coming back to us. You're home.
For 48 young people, it was the last dance. Most of the dead from the Stardust nightclub fire were teenagers.
I was 18 at the time and Mary was 19 and Martina, she was only 16, and I convinced my dad to let her go. I said, she'd be grand, I'll look after her, nothing will happen to her.
Martina and Mary Keegan, who'd gone to the disco with their sister Antoinette, did not escape.
Said we'll hold on to one another, right? We'll stay together, we'll all get out together. We realised exit 5 was closed, locked, we couldn't get out, people were banging on the door, right? Trying to open the doors, they were locked, so we went to the next exit. It was the same at that exit. People couldn't get out. And then there was the panic then with people rushing to get out the place, right, because it was in flames.
She's always felt someone should be held accountable for the grief her parents had to endure.
My mother told them that Martina had these rings on her and Mary had a necklace with a link of hearts on it. My mother and father on the Sunday, the 15th of February, I think it was at 6 o'clock in the evening, were handed 2 plastic bags, one with Martina's rings in it and the other with Mary's necklace.
This fresh inquest established several facts, the most damning being that some of the exits were locked, chained or otherwise obstructed. There's always been a deep sense of injustice here, and that's what's driven the bereaved to campaign tirelessly for their sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, the 48 young people who went to a disco and never came home. It's taken 43 years, but this verdict allows people to move on and their loved ones to rest in peace. David Blevins, Sky News in Dublin.
The Prince of Wales left his first day of official duties since his wife revealed her cancer diagnosis with get well soon cards for both her and his father, the King. The woman who wrote them told Sky News that she did so because the Prince is human after all. Since Kate's personal video, William has spent 3.5 weeks out of the public eye with his family. Sky's royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills reports.
You can understand if Prince William was a bit apprehensive. Almost a month at home with the family for Easter, and the first time we've seen him since the Princess announced she has cancer. But meeting volunteers at Surplus to Supper was a good distraction.
How chopped up is this going to be? A bit smaller? You're trying your best. Yeah. It's quite hard to talk, have this sort of hair. I know. My finger, it takes a bit of time to get back into it.
Most of the chat staying away from the personal, but they wanted to show that they cared.
Lots of cards, are you very kind?
He's human after all. Remember, he's royal, but above all, he's a husband, a father to the children, so he needs to look after her.
As Kate made clear, time as a family unit was what they needed. But they both know that William has still got to carry the responsibility of royal duties. Unusually this time, travelling in a van, delivering meals to a local youth centre, the next stop. A low-key visit like this one wouldn't usually attract so much attention. Of course, Prince William's been doing this long enough to know exactly why there is more attention on the work that he's doing. But he'll be hoping that there won't be a return to the hysteria that we saw before Easter, and that people will continue to leave his family alone. Sharing the work they do here, they were also happy to help him through that first official day away from Kate.
Hopefully their little break together and their time just to reflect and then just to come back in there. But it was a privilege to be the first person or the first people back as he comes back.
We'll only see in the coming weeks how much of this he feels able to do. His most important roles back at home as husband and father. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News in West London.
Finally, Team GB's new Olympics kit seems to have passed 2 key tests, at least according to the athletes who will wear it today. It's not too skimpy, unlike some of the clothing given to America's female competitors in recent days. And it features an untouched version of the Union Jack. A host of former Olympians and hopefuls revealed the official sportswear today in Paris, and our sports correspondent Rob Harris spoke to some of them.
The big reveal. In Paris, unveiling Olympic and Paralympic kits. This, the look for Team GB. Back to basics, classic red, white and blue.
I've been in the process of getting ready for Paris for years, and then all of a sudden it becomes real and it's all coming to life. So yeah, it's very exciting to get in the kit, and it just makes me feel very proud and think I really want to make sure that I get here.
This, a traditional look to Team GB, at a time when variations on flag designs by sports teams has stoked heated debates.
Team GB hope this kit will put the traditionalist minds at rest with a very patriotic design and no tinkering at all with the Union Jack. There it is in red, white and blue.
For athletes, it's the technical specifications that matter most to maximise performance.
I was actually consulted in the design process for the Paralympic side of things as well, and we thought about access features, and the team sort of really focused on sort of not just the sort of performance side of it, but also the functionality and the access side of it as well.
The specific needs of female athletes now a focus for designers.
I think as an athlete you want to feel at your best when you're out there competing, so you want to feel confident and, you know, comfortable in your kit.
Sometimes athletes feeling kits might be too skimpy.
Yeah, I think every athlete is completely different. I think it's about having, you know, a broad response from, you know, a large section of athletes to understand, well, how do we make the kit more appropriate for you and how do you feel more confident in the kit that you wear? And I think the key thing is putting the athletes at the heart of that.
Athletes know how they'll look at the Games, now just needing to secure places to compete in the summer. To deliver the 66 Olympic medals Team GB is projected to win. Rob Harris, Sky News, Paris.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the political journalist and broadcaster Theo Usherwood and the political correspondent for Politics Joe, Ava Santina Evans. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the Mail. Its headline echoing our lead story, Sturgeon husband charged over SNP cash probe. We'll be back with that and other stories. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. Peter Murrell, Nicola Sturgeon's husband, has been charged in connection with the embezzlement of SNP funds. Iran has warned it's considering of changing its doctrine, but states its nuclear program is purely for peaceful purposes if Israel targets its nuclear facilities. And the Scottish Government has ditched its flagship target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 75% by 2030. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages of the newspapers as they arrive. It's time now to see what's making the headlines with the political journalist and broadcaster, Theo Usherwood, and the political correspondent for Politics Joe, Ava Santina Evans. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Leading the Daily Mail tomorrow, Nicola Sturgeon's husband charged over SNP cash probe. The Guardian are reporting on their front page that the state could be left with £15 billion of debt by the nationalisation of Thames Water. The Metro has the story of the MP Mark Menzies, who's lost the Conservative whip over allegations he misused campaign funds, something he denies. In The Times, Sunak vows crackdown on what he calls the culture of sick note. The Telegraph has that same story, as does The Express, which says the Prime Minister has told Sick Note Britain to get a grip and a job. The Financial Times reports on the government ordering port authorities to implement post-Brexit health and safety checks on EU imports using a phased approach rather than all at once. Meanwhile, according to The Eye, the EU is poised to offer a possible future Labour government a diplomatic olive branch by giving UK students under the age of 30 the option of studying in EU countries for up to 4 years. And The Star suggests the popularity of the full English breakfast is no more. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Theo Usherwood and Ava Santina Evans. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the Daily Mail, a story that's in many of the newspapers, and this is the fact that Peter Murrell, Nicola Sturgeon's husband, has been charged over the alleged embezzlement of SNP funds. Theo.
Obviously, criminal proceedings now active, and we can't begin to talk about the implications for the criminal process, if you will. But there are going to be political ramifications for this. Remember, earlier this month, for the first time, Labour took a lead in Scotland, 33 points to 31, over the SNP. That's the first time they've held a lead in more than a decade. And of course, there will be, we don't yet know whether this trial is going to take place before or after a general election and whether the fallout will become public knowledge. But it will be difficult for the SNP to manage this and head into a general election where they are fighting to maintain that lead that they have. They've held the dominance that they've held in Scottish politics now for more than 10 years. So it is a major development in this story, not just for Mr. Murrell and, of course, Nicola Sturgeon, but also for politics, with the political landscape in Scotland.
And Ava, public knowledge of this is bound to have political impact, isn't it?
Yeah, but, you know, this could actually be seen as a good day for someone like Humza Yousaf because, you know, today Scotland announced that they were going to, the SNP announced that they were going to renege on their climate promises. They were going to move their net zero targets away from 2030, which would have been politically, you know, pretty climactic for the First Minister. So actually, for this to be sort of shroud all of those headlines, and now potentially you might be able to blame this on the old regime and not actually to do with the new SNP that will be incoming again at the general election, could be quite beneficial for him.
Interesting viewpoint that I've not heard today, actually. Let's have a look at the Financial Times, and this is the nuclear threat from Iran. Previously, that state saying that their nuclear capability was for peaceful ends, but there is an about turn because of recent events, they're suggesting.
Yes, Iran, the FT is reporting, has warned Israel it could review its nuclear stance if its atomic facilities are threatened. And of course, this is what the White House and global leaders do not want to see, this escalation of tensions between Iran and Israel. Reports also that Benjamin Netanyahu is going to be, in effect, given the green light by Joe Biden and his national security team to go ahead with the Rafah offensive in return for not retaliating against those drone attacks and missile attacks from Israel over the last weekend. So tensions on a knife edge, proverbial knife edge, in that region, and there is a threat that if Israel goes back in, or a warning from Iran that if Israel goes back in, then we're going to see the conflict escalate further.
Do you think, Ava, that we're seeing now a sort of descaling of or de-escalation of the potential of a retaliatory strike because Iran are saying that, you know, they will deploy nuclear weapons potentially, but America is possibly going to offer Rafah, an invasion of Rafah, to stop Israel retaliating?
I mean, it's very concerning for anyone who lives on the Gaza Strip. I mean, you've got already 34,000 people dead on the Strip. And, yeah, that sort of bargaining is not going to offer anyone any comfort, is it? It's extremely concerning. But, look, you know, so we've got renewed calls today. Mike Johnson, who is the Republican Speaker of the House, he is speaking today about Ukraine and how America desperately needs to arm Ukraine and send bullets over. He doesn't want to see any American boys being sent over. When you're looking at the entire region, the entire area, and you're thinking about potential ramping up of tensions, that same rhetoric needs to be thought about. You don't want to ever have to send troops over into the Middle East, and if you continue to allow Iran and Israel to ramp up tensions, that's going to be the inevitable fallout.
And Theo, how do the decisions of the US and the UK announcing new sanctions on Iran's drone programme, how does that play into the entire situation?
It's interesting, isn't it, that the US and UK have seen somewhat as an outlier, and also amongst the rest of the global community, we've also got reports with the UN, and I know Sky's been reporting on it, are going to be looking at recognition of the Palestinian state. And will that? Which of course the United States are going to block. They have vetoed it now. Well, is the UK? You know, where does that? Is it going to be now increasingly the case that we actually see the United States and the UK much more isolated in their support for Israel, alongside, well, against, or paradoxically against the rest of the international community?
And we know that the UK was one of 2 countries that abstained in that vote, which is quite interesting. How do you read that, Ava?
Well, I mean, it's rather extraordinary when you think about the polling about Palestine up and down the country, and you wonder if, you know, the views of the country, which tend to swing very high towards a ceasefire, are actually being reflected in our foreign policy.
Let us move on to, we're going to have a look at our Prime Minister's decision to have a look at the sick note, suggesting that perhaps it shouldn't be prescribed by GPs and there should be specialist workers who are versed in health and safety at work and people's mental health, etc., that they should be given the sick notes and that they're used far too often, essentially.
I think what the Prime Minister is alluding to in this speech that we're expecting to hear tomorrow is that it's far too easy for people, this is the Prime Minister's opinion, the Conservatives' opinion, to get their sick note and get signed off from work by just simply going to their GP. They might have a relationship with their GP. The GP, the argument is going to be too busy to go through all of the details and simply sign the note. Well, it's now called a fit to work note, isn't it? Yes. We've already had that change, allowing somebody to take time off work. And we're seeing the welfare bill increase exponentially, and the Prime Minister is trying to get around this. What he's saying now is he wants to, in effect, outsource that task of signing fit-to-work notes to specialists. But we don't actually know whether those specialists have medical degrees.
No, that wasn't clear.
And that's unclear. And you could end up in a situation where somebody is saying, actually, with my medical degree, a GP would say, with my medical degree, I can tell you that you are you're not fit to work because of your mental state or an injury you might have suffered. And then you're going up against somebody who says that you are fit to work, but they don't actually have the clinical background. And I would expect, and there was one line in, I think it was in the front of the Telegraph, saying, the government want to test this. They know they're on shaky ground. I'd imagine this would be open very quickly to legal challenge, where you're putting somebody's opinion saying you are fit to work who doesn't have a clinical background against somebody else's opinion who does have a clinical medical degree saying actually you're not fit to work. And we'll see legal challenges if this were to go ahead, I'd imagine, quite quickly.
I think you're probably right. The Guardian suggesting that the Prime Minister is warning that there is a risk of over-medicalising normal worries by diagnosing them as mental health conditions.
Well, I mean, both parties have identified that we have a crisis in this country, and that crisis is that there is, yes, a lot of economic activity because people are being signed off of work because of mental health issues. But what neither party have done is tried to come up with some sort of constructive way of tackling that. We have heard from Labour that they're going to put a mental health specialist in every school, and they would like mental health hubs to be more widely available. But what Sunak's doing today is he's diagnosing the problem but not actually providing any sort of solution. So, if these specialists decide that someone is fit to work, how are you going to make them go to work? You can't exactly drag them into the workplace and demand that they start typing at a computer.
Yeah, the problem is real, though. I mean, when we look at the stats, total number of people signed off soared to a record 11 million last year, and it was 5.3 million in 2015/16.
But this is symptomatic of the problems facing so many people in this country in terms of the stresses of their work, of being able to go to work, of their mental state. This has been a problem, as you rightly say, Julian, that has been going on now for some years. And the government's answer up until this point is, in effect, to try and find a cost-neutral way of dealing with it, i.e. it's not going to cost a huge amount of money just to get somebody else, apart from a GP, to sign the forms to say whether somebody's fit to work, rather than actually trying to get to the nub of the problem as to why people are not well enough to go to work, or why people don't feel in a mental state to be able to go to work and do their jobs and live healthy lives in contributing to the economy. And that's something that the government, up until now, hasn't really got to grips with, and it's going to be a challenge for Keir Starmer.
And there does seem to be a suggestion that people are abusing the system, as it were, Eva, don't you think?
Yeah, I think that sometimes that might be a sort of easy get-out that governments like to use, rather than actually have to fund a system that will, see an improvement. I mean, you think about a lot of mental health specialists, actually Rosanna Allen-Khan, who used to be on the shadow Labour front bench but is now a backbencher, she speaks often about this sort of need to put people who come in to GPs for medical assistance with their mental health straight onto medication. It's sort of the Americanisation of our mental health offering in this country, and it's because we simply don't have the provision to send people to therapy. If you're in a situation where you're in an emergency, you will get help, and the NHS is very good at dealing with emergencies. But if you're someone who simply can't cope, then we might not have the facilities to make you better.
Yeah, interesting point. Eva and Theo, thank you very much for the moment. We are going to take a break. Coming up, what might be the political fallout from the allegations surrounding the MP Mark Menzies, who's lost the Conservative whip? We'll discuss that and more next.
Big stories don't always come from big cities.
I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent, and this is where I grew up. We can reveal that the driver who hit Harry Dunn is 42-year-old Anne Sakoulas.
Just met the president and we never thought we'd get this far.
This is what they're up against, that the wind is the really big problem. It is back-breaking work and the smoke is thick. It's been working well. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have.
What would you do if this place wasn't open?
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's really scary. We're terrified.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID.
Hopefully this will be the last wave.
I never knew they would make it. It's amazing.
Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. Wales was the first to introduce the plastic bag charge. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Theo Usherwood and Ava Santina Evans. Let's have a look at the front page of the Metro now, shall we? And this story of the Conservative politician who has lost the whip, Mark Menzies. He's claimed that he phoned an aide at 3:15 a.m. saying he was locked in a flat by bad people while drinking and needed £5,000 to be freed. Theo.
It's an extraordinary story, isn't it? He's reported to have called his 78-year-old former campaign manager in the early hours, asking her, "Are you on your own? I've got in with some bad people and they've got me locked in a flat and they want £5,000 to release me." The money was to come from a bank account, the Metro is reporting, and of course this was a story first reported in the Times containing donations to his campaign fund. But of course the aide pointed out that actually it was 3:15 in the morning and she couldn't get the transfer without leaving the house. But this is another one of those stories for Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives. We're now up to 18 independent MPs, the majority of them Conservatives, for various wrongdoings and misdemeanours. And if we're going to have an October election, how many more are there going to be? How many more headlines? He's now lost the whip. Simon Hart's, the Chief Whip's, intervened and suspended the whip from Mr Pawsey. Not yet clear whether we're going to end up with a by-election or a recall petition and then a by-election. He is in a relatively safe constituency and filed in Lancashire. I think his majority is something like 16,000 over Labour. So the Conservatives, things are dire for the Conservative Party, but they would hope to at least try and retain that seat if there was to be a by-election.
Ava, we should just say that Mark Menzies has denied all of the allegations against him, but Labour are calling for a police investigation to whether he did misuse campaign funds.
Yeah, Labour are questioning that whether there's any criminality here. I think it's because the sort of number of funds that were being laid out by the Times yesterday. I mean, there was one charge for £14,000. He wanted another £35,000, to which he was apparently told that there was no money left. There just seems to be sort of a veritable number of different amounts of money that he was looking to get out of this campaign fund that eventually dried up. And a lot of it seems to be to do with medical bills, which is quite confusing if you think about you don't really need to pay for medical medicine in this country. So it seems the whole thing seems totally bizarre.
Private cover.
But why would you go private if you don't have the cash to back it up? It just seems totally bizarre to me. But yeah, so looking ahead to a possible by-election, I think actually this would be quite frustrating for Labour because at this point it's sort of like just call the general election because parties having to spend a fortune on campaigning, and they would quite like to reserve all of those funds to put together a proper campaign for the general election.
To the eye, Theo, tell us how the EU are offering olive branch.
This is for 18 to 30-year-olds, and it would the plans being drawn up by the Commission would in effect allow anybody in the UK between 18 and 30 to travel to a singular European country and study and travel and work in that country for up to 4 years. It would, however, be a reciprocal arrangement, and those in the EU in the same age bracket would be expected to be allowed to come to the UK under the same arrangements. But you wouldn't be, if you were a British student, you wouldn't be able to go to the European Union and then travel around the European Union. You'd have to go to one particular country. Labour, this is seen as potentially an olive branch to be offered to Labour. Labour is saying, well, it's a sort of denial, saying they don't have any plans. But nobody's talking about Labour having any plans. This is a European Commission plan, and it remains to be seen whether Labour would bite at the chance, especially, and I think the politics of this would be Labour would be looking, Keir Starmer, whether you can do it or not, would be looking to try and win over younger voters in the same way that Jeremy Corbyn was able to do particularly in 2017, by saying actually this is something that he would go for.
Do you think this is plausible, Ava?
Well, I think it's going to be very frustrating if you're aged between 30 and 35, because I think, you've just missed out and you sort of had, you've had 2 recessions in your lifetime, student loans, and now you can't travel to Europe. You're having the worst of all worlds here. But look, this is not something I can imagine that Keir Starmer would commit to before a general election. I think, I understand what you're talking about trying to recoup the youth vote, but I actually think he's so desperate to sort of move himself away for himself as the shadow Brexit secretary and move himself away as, sort of all of the derogatory names that Rishi Sunak gives him about being too friendly with Europe. I can't see him committing to it.
Okay. We shall see. Ava and Theo, thank you very much for taking us through the papers. We'll see you in the next hour. In the meantime, let's catch up on the weather now for you. Well, the weather will turn more settled going into the weekend, but there'll still be a little rain for some. Many places will start dry on Friday, but patchy rain will extend from Donegal to south-east England. There'll also be a few showers across northern and central Britain. It'll be mostly mild and blustery, with gales in the far north. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, Peter Murrell, Nicola Sturgeon's husband, is charged in connection with the embezzlement of SNP funds.